Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 4 Lucknow to Bombay 1916 to 1918. Part 2. Jinnah argued as eloquently, as forcefully as he alone could, but to no avail. At its first test, his dream of spreading communal harmony and loving unity was thus rudely jolted. Sir Dinshaw never agreed indeed, never spoke as a friend to Jinnah after that hour of such a bitter and rude awakening to what everyone else in Bombay already knew. Nor would he sanction the marriage under any circumstances. First, he forbade Ruthie ever to see Jinnah again, at least while she remained a minor under his palatial roof of fine marble. Then he sought legal remedies, filing an injunction to prevent their marriage once she came of age, based on the Parsi Marriage Act. But he was pitted against a barrister who rarely lost any case and would gladly have died before surrendering in this matter. Predictably, perhaps, Ruthie's passionate devotion to her self-chosen husband-to-be only intensified, thanks to her father's adamant insistence that she never see him again. Juliet-like, she would not be deterred by prejudice or preference of her parents. Sir Dinshaw met his own match in stubborn resolution twice over in this long-suffering, committed young couple. Silently, patiently, passionately, they waited till Ruthie would attain her majority at 18 and married just a few months after that, as soon as the last legal obstacle could be slashed aside by Jinnah's invincible courtroom sword. The German and Ottoman armies proved as frustratingly difficult and far more deadly than Ruthie's father. The Mesport disaster, or Bastard War, as the dreadful Iraqi desert tragedy to the British Indian arms came to be called, led to many angry questions in Parliament and long inquiries that revealed utter incompetence in the shipment of military medical supplies and other vital material from Indian ports to the Persian Gulf. Secretary of State Chamberlain accepted the entire blame, though hardly deserved as his own, resigning from command of India office in mid-1917. Thanks to that sacrificial act, however, Liberal Edwin Montagu, 1879 to 1924, was placed in charge of India and rose in the House of Commons on August 20th, 1917, to announce that the new inspiring policy of His Majesty's government, with which the Government of India are in complete accord, is that of the increasing association of Indians in every branch of administration and the gradual development of self-governing institutions with a view to the progressive realization of responsible government in India as an integral part of the British Empire. At last appeared to be the promise of dominion status that political leaders throughout India had waited since the war began. Nationalist eyes glossed over the gradual development and progressive realization, reading only self-governing institutions and responsible government mantras in Montagu's formula. Imperialist Curzon, rather than Montagu, sat on the home government's all-powerful inner circle war cabinet and managed with various official safeguards adroitly to sabotage every major reform that was to emerge during Montagu's tenure at Whitehall. In the winter of 1917, however, Edwin Montagu became the first Secretary of State for India actually to visit the subcontinent while holding that high office. The ancient complexity of India, its pluralism and paradox affected Montagu's deeply as it did most visitors from afar, though he had toured the country once before in 1913 and, as a Jew, considered himself an Oriental. He had never seen so many people, so much poverty, amid so ostentatious a display of wealth and luxury. India fascinated and terrified him so that by the end of his journey, he was thoroughly exhausted, frustrated, and drained. In fact, poor Lugubrious Montague was traumatized by India, flattered by the magnanimity of her welcome, shocked at the magnitude of her problems and plight, and disoriented by the official royal treatment he received. Of all the political leaders Montague talked with in India, Jinnah impressed him most. Young, perfectly mannered, impressive looking, armed to the teeth with dialectics, and insistent upon the whole of his scheme. Viceroy Chelmsford tried to argue with him and was tied up into knots. Jinnah is a very clever man, and it is, of course, an outrage that such a man should have no chance of running the affairs of his own country. Montague confided to his diary. My visit to India means that we are going to do something, and something big. I cannot go home and produce a little thing or nothing. It must be epoch making or it is a failure. It must be the keystone of the future history of India. Nothing is wanting in comfort. I am not the stuff to carry this sort of thing off. For the first time in my life, I wish I looked like Curzon. I wished Lloyd George were here. I wish the whole British cabinet had come. I wish Asquith were here. It is one of India's misfortune that I am alone. Alone the person that has got to carry this thing through. Annie Besant, fresh out of prison, thanks to Jinnah's personal appeal to the House Minister on her behalf, invited Montague to attend the Calcutta Congress over which she was to preside that December. Oh, if only Lloyd George were in charge of this thing, Montague moaned to his diary. He would, of course, dash down to the Congress and make them a great oration. I am prevented from doing this. It might save the whole situation, but the government of India have carefully arranged our plans so that we shall be in Bombay and the Congress, the real Indian political movement, is in Calcutta. Mrs. Besant was the first woman, the only English woman, to be elected president of the Congress, her reward for the suffering she experienced after her arrest in mid-year for seditious journalism. Jinnah took charge of the Bombay branch of her Home Rule League immediately after Mrs. Besant's internment on June 15, 1917, and Ruthie was one of her most ardent admirers. Just under 5,000 delegates and almost as many visitors attended the Calcutta conference, where Jinnah moved the most important resolution calling for the implementation of the Lucknow Pact reforms, a resolution carried by acclamation. A few days later, Jinnah moved much the same resolution before the Muslim League, which strongly urges upon the government the immediate introduction of a bill embodying the reforms contained in the Congress League scheme of December 1916 as the first step towards the realization of responsible government. As the prospect of responsible government appeared to draw closer, many of his colleagues from League were growing more concerned that Muslim interests would be ignored by the Hindu majority. Jinnah reassured them, arguing, if 70 million Muslims do not approve of a measure which is carried by a ballot box, do you think that it could be carried out and administered in this country? Muslims should not have the fear that the Hindus can pass any legislation as they are in a majority, and that would be the end of the matter. He strongly advised the Muslim League not to be scared away. Muhammad Ali had been elected to preside over the Muslim League's Calcutta session, but his chair was empty throughout the meeting as he remained interned under house arrest with his brother Shaukat Ali, 1873 to 1938. Since 1915, the Ali brothers had been under arrest by the government under its martial emergency powers. The newspapers they edited, Comrade and Hamdard, had argued favorably on behalf of Caliph Abdul Hamid of the Ottoman Empire, but British officialdom retained sphinx-like silence for over 2 years concerning the precise reasons for arresting these two alims, till Jinnah pressed the question in the Central Legislative Council in 1917 and was told that they were interned because they expressed and promoted sympathy with the king's enemies. The Ali brothers became a rallying cry, not just for the Muslims but for Hindus as well, and were singled out by Mahatma Gandhi as his first great national cause in opposition to the British Raj. While Gandhi courted popular Muslim support by allying himself most outspokenly with the struggle on behalf of the Ali brothers, he sought simultaneously and won official confidence by urging the Indians to enlist in the British Army. Both positions appeared paradoxical to disciples who had never considered the Mahatma, enamored either of Muslims or of war. Yet in the late 1917 and throughout 1918, those causes proved to be Gandhi's most important springboards to political power. Jinnah at this juncture was most vocal in his criticism of Britain's intensified recruiting drive in India, insisting first of all that Indians should be put on the same footing as the European British subjects before being asked to fight. Specifically, he demanded that royal commissions be made available to the people of India. Chelmsford angrily rebuked that position as bargaining, to which Jinnah irately replied, "Is it bargaining consistently with my self-respect as king's equal subject in my own country, to tell my government face to face that this bar must be removed? Is it bargaining, my lord, to say that in my own country I should be put on the same footing as the European British subjects? Is that bargaining?" As an elected member of the council, Jinnah was, of course, invited to the war conference the Viceroy planned to hold that April in Delhi. But first he had a much more important engagement to attend in Bombay. Jinnah married Ruthie on Friday, April 19, 1918, at his house, South Court on Mount Pleasant Road atop Malabar Hill in Bombay. She had converted to Islam 3 days earlier, though she remained a non-sectarian mystic all her life. None of Ruthie's relatives attended her wedding. She had fled from her father's palatial prison less than a mile away on the day she turned 18 and was mourned as if dead by Sir Dinshaw until she and Jinnah separated less than a decade after they had married. The Raja of Mahmudabad and just a few other intimate Muslim friends of Jinnah attended the quiet wedding. The ring which Jinnah gave to his wife on the wedding day was my father's gift, Mahmudabad's son and heir recalled. The Jinnahs spent their honeymoon at Nainital in our house. It was not quite Darjeeling, yet perched over a mile above sea level. Nainital was the cool hill station that the Nehrus as well as Mahmudabads liked best, and Jinnah and Ruthie rode their horses over miles of lovely trails through rich forests of pine, relishing the freedom, the perfect liberation and joy of being together alone in an environment whose natural beauty seemed barely to reflect the bliss they found in one another. After less than a week of honeymooning in the hills, the young couple motored down to Delhi, where they stayed in Maidens, a magnificent hotel just outside the old city gate, beyond the Red Fort, an ideal hideaway replete with Mughal gardens, fountains, and pools, a regal staircase, a crystal chandelier, and a palatial dining hall, the perfect mixture of imperial elegance and British privacy. Maidens was to remain Jinnah's favorite hotel retreat in Delhi. They were a stunning couple. Ruthie's long hair was decked in ever-fresh flowers, her lovely lithe body draped in diaphanous silks of flaming red and gold, pale blue or pink. She wore headbands replete with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, and smoked English cigarettes in a long ivory and silver filter that added a flamboyance to her every graceful gesture, bend and twirl of arm or body, even as the musical ring of her uninhibited laughter reminded the world of her beautiful presence. Jinnah, with his bristling black mustache and brilliantly luminous eyes, dressed as smartly as any British lord inside Buckingham, seemed the perfect consort for his bride, and they looked in that spring of 1918 as happy and fulfilled as they felt. With a start that perfectly beautiful, surely they had reason to expect that the future might be one long life of continuing happiness, if not eternal bliss. The Delhi War Conference was the first battleground on which Jinnah confronted the man who was to become his foremost contender for national prominence and political power. With his honeymoon not yet over, Jinnah could hardly be blamed perhaps for underestimating just how potent a force was arrayed against him that April, seated half naked across the Viceroy's conference table. In response to the invitation, I went to Delhi, Gandhi recalled, gratuitously protesting. It was not in my nature to placate anyone by adulation or at the cost of self-respect. Recounting this event almost a decade later, as the Mahatma whose experiments with truth would inspire millions of young Indians and students the world over to emulate his virtues, Gandhi could not, of course, ignore what he had done, nor could he erase it from his conscience. Yet how was he to explain himself? I had fully intended to submit the Muslim case to the Viceroy. He insisted, arguing his principled objections to participating in a conference that perforce excluded the Ali brothers. Thus, after reaching Delhi, he wrote to Lord Chelmsford, explaining my hesitation to take part in the conference. He invited me to discuss the question with him. I had a prolonged discussion with him and his private secretary, Mr. Maffei. As a result, I agreed to take part in the conference. Gandhi's part, however, was to be confined to seconding the key resolution on recruiting Indians for the army, and in regards to the Muslim demands, I was to address a letter to the Viceroy, having capitulated to Chelmsford. However, the Mahatma was so conscience-stricken at what he had agreed to that he resolved to do it as briefly, as palatably as possible. His second would be one short sentence. With a full sense of my responsibility, I begged to support the resolution. He delivered that sentence, moreover, first in Hindi and then translated it himself into English. Then, in his autobiography, he focused on the initial language he had used, not on the words spoken or the meaningful support they rendered to martial violence and the British war machine. Many congratulated me on my having spoken Hindustani. That was, they said, the first instance within living memory of anyone having spoken in Hindustani at such a meeting. That congratulations and the discovery that I was the first to speak in Hindustani at a viceregal meeting hurt my national pride. I felt like shrinking into myself. What a tragedy that the language of the country should be taboo in meetings held in the country for work relating to the country, and that a speech there in Hindustani by a stray individual like myself should be a matter of congratulation. Incidents like these are reminders of the low state to which we have been reduced. Unable to admit how wretched he felt at receiving the congratulations of so many imperialists for having abandoned non-violence to curry favors with the viceroy, Gandhi expressed his true feelings as a stray individual whose national pride was hurt, but justified them to his own memory and world purely on national language grounds. There was, in fact, no taboo on Hindustani, which seems hardly the reason Gandhi felt like shrinking into himself. His commitment to recruiting for the war would, however, indeed drive him to a mental breakdown before the end of 1918. But Gandhi's loyalist role at the war conference proved devastating to Jinnah's anti-government stand and caught the entire nationalist leadership in attendance at Delhi off balance. Jinnah had tried to move a substitute nationalist resolution but was ruled out of order by the viceroy. In a telegram he had sent Chelmsford, Jinnah boldly insisted, "We cannot ask our young men to fight for principles, the application of which is denied to their own country. A subject race cannot fight for others with the heart and energy with which a free race can fight for the freedom of itself and others. If India is to make great sacrifices in defense of the empire, it must be as a partner in the empire and not as a dependency. Let her feel that she is fighting for her own freedom as well as for the commonwealth of free nations under the British crown, and then she will strain every nerve to stand by England to the last. Let full responsible government be established in India within a definite period to be fixed by statute with the Congress League scheme as the first stage, and a bill to that effect be introduced into the parliament at once." Had Gandhi been willing to close ranks behind Jinnah's leadership in Delhi in 1918, Jinnah would have mistrusted him less a year later. Together they might not have persuaded the British to grant India freedom overnight, but could certainly have accelerated the transfer of power timetable. They might even have avoided partition. Tilak and Annie Besant marched shoulder to shoulder with Jinnah. Bombay's Governor Lord Wellington denounced the three of them in a letter to Montagu for having no feeling of what is their duty to the empire at this crisis. A few months later, Chelmsford would further poison his Secretary of State's mind about Jinnah and several other of his nationalist colleagues in the Legislative Council, labeling them irreconcilables with whom it is no use thinking that we can do anything. There is a root of bitterness in them which cannot be eradicated, and for my part, I am not going to attempt the task. Governor Wellington convened his own provincial war conference in Bombay's town hall on June 10, 1918. Jinnah was there and must have felt the blood rush to his face as Wellington remarked, "There are a certain number of gentlemen, some of whom have considerable influence with the public, many of them members of the political organization called the Home Rule League, whose activities have been such of late years that I cannot honestly feel sure of the sincerity of their support." Tilak tried to amend Wellington's proposed resolution, insisting there could be no home defense without home rule, but he was ordered to leave the conference. Jinnah then rose to speak and said he was pained, very much pained, that His Excellency should have thought fit to cast doubts on the sincerity and the loyalty of Home Rule Party. He was certainly sorry, but with the utmost respect, he must enter his emphatic protest against that. They were anxious as anyone else to help the defense of the motherland and the empire. The difference was only regarding the methods. For government's methods, the Home Rule Party did not want. He was only making suggestions for the improvement of the scheme. The government had their own scheme, namely for the recruitment of sepoys, but that was not enough to save them from that German menace. They wanted a national army, or, in other words, a citizen army and not a purely mercenary army. I say that if you wish to enable us to help you to facilitate and stimulate the recruiting, you must make the educated people feel that they are the citizens of the empire and the king's equal subjects. But the government do not do so. You say that we shall be trusted and made real partners in the empire. When? We don't want words. We don't want the consideration of the matter indefinitely put off. We want action and immediate deeds. Jinnah's public conflict with Wellington was reflected in their acerbic social relationship. The Jinnahs had been invited to dinner at Bombay's government house soon after returning from their honeymoon. Ruthie wore one of her lowest cut Paris evening gowns, and Lady Wellington was quick to order her servant to bring a wrap to cover up Mrs. Jinnah, in case she felt cold. Jinnah did not wait for the servant's return, jumping up from table to inform his hostess. When Mrs. Jinnah feels cold, she will say so and ask for a wrap herself. He escorted his wife from the room. They did not set foot inside the government house again till the Wellingtons had moved out. Less than a week after the Provincial War Conference broke up, Jinnah's League celebrated Home Rule Day on June 16, 1918, with a mass rally in Bombay at which Jinnah said, "Lord Wellington has said that the support of the Home Rule Party is half-hearted. My answer is this: your methods and policy are all wrong. I cannot believe that even a bureaucrat is so blind as not to see it. They do not trust us and therefore are not prepared to allow us to take up arms for the defense of our own motherland and of the empire. They want us to continue an organization which they call an army, which is a sepoy army and nothing else. And they then turn round and tell us that we are not helping them. I say what Mr. Montague, in his speech on the Mesopotamia report, has said, that the government of India is too wooden, too iron, too antediluvian to be of any use for the modern purpose we have in view. Less than a month later, Gandhi wrote to urge Jinnah to make an emphatic declaration regarding recruitment, arguing, "Can you not see that if every home rule leader became a potent recruiting agency, whilst at the same time fighting for constitutional rights, we should ensure the passing of the Congress League scheme? Seek ye first the recruiting office, and everything will be added unto you." It was one of Gandhi's strangest letters and appears to have left Jinnah too shocked to respond. Gandhi came to appreciate the wisdom of Jinnah's position on recruiting as soon as he started going from village to village in Gujarat to the beat of a soldier's tin drum. As soon as I set about my task, my eyes were opened. My optimism received a rude shock. We had meetings wherever we went. People did attend, but hardly one or two would offer themselves as recruits. You are votary of Ahimsa. How can you ask us to take up arms? What good has government done for India to deserve our cooperation? These are similar questions used to be put to us. By August, Gandhi wrote Maffei, quoting even Tougher common peasant questions such as how can we, who can hardly bear the sight of blood and who have never handled arms, suddenly summon up the courage to join the army. Before September was over, Gandhi's health broke down, permitting him to abandon this most difficult, uncongenial work. I've already nearly ruined my constitution during the recruiting campaign. I felt that the illness was bound to be prolonged and possibly fatal. Whilst I was thus tossing on the bed of pain, Vallabhbhai Patel brought the news that Germany had been completely defeated and that the commissioner had sent word that recruiting was no longer necessary. The news that I had no longer to worry myself about recruiting came as a very great relief. Vallabhbhai came up with Dr. Nuga, who felt my pulse and said, "Your pulse is quite good. I see absolutely no danger. This is a nervous breakdown due to extreme weakness." I passed the night without sleep. The morning broke without death coming, but I could not get rid of the feeling that the end was near. Montagu's report on Indian constitutional reforms was published in July 1918, recommending partial control of the executive in the provinces by the legislature and the increasing influence of the legislature upon the executive in the government of India, and as far as possible, complete popular control in local bodies. Jinnah studied the initial report and issued his reactions to the press on July 23, 1918, noting that the proposals are not like the laws of the Persians and the Medes, but they may be modified upon further discussion. Great effort has been made to face the problem. I know that great difficulties were put in the way of Mr. Montagu in India, and he was called upon to deal with one of the most intricate and complicated problems that any country had ever to face. But I think he has been unduly influenced by the alarmist section, which has resulted in innumerable restrictions being put on the concessions that have been made to the people. The advancement would be worthless unless in the major provinces like Bombay, all the departments except the police and justice are transferred. I am willing to accept this only as a transitional stage with a view to show that for the present, the maintenance of law and order may be reserved to the government, since the argument has been advanced that, after all, we are going through an experimental stage. Again, Jinnah proved himself eminently moderate and flexible. A brilliant constitutional lawyer and negotiator, had his efforts to deal directly with Montagu's not been sabotaged by the government of India and its Black Roulette Acts, the years of tragedy that were to ensue in the wake of the war need not have derailed the process of responsible transfer of power, set so patiently in motion by Britain's two greatest Liberal Secretaries of State, John Morley and Edwin Montagu. Jinnah served on the Joint Congress League Committee to coordinate both responses to Montagu's proposals, which emerged as qualified acceptance of the report combined with reaffirmation of the Lucknow Pact, and urged rapid strides toward attainment of full responsible government. Congress leaders differed widely in their assessments of the report. Surendra Nath Banerjee was willing to support it. C.R. Das, anticipating the failure of Diarchy, wanted real responsible government in 5 years, while Motilal Nehru was ready to wait another 2 decades. The regular annual sessions of Congress and the Muslim League were scheduled to be held in Delhi in December. As World War I sputtered to its end that November, so did Wellington's tenure over Bombay. The Jinnahs could hardly wait for that governor to leave, and when they learned of plans by some of Wellington's Parsi friends to host a public function at Town Hall, honoring him on the eve of his departure, they launched a mass opposition movement to that function. It was Jinnah's first and most vigorous public demonstration against a British official. The Wellington Memorial Committee timed their meeting to start at 5 p.m. on December 11th. Some 300 of Jinnah's youthful followers started camping out near the steps of Bombay's town hall the night before. Police kept the broad steps themselves clear of crowds till 10 a.m. when the hall opened, shortly before which Jinnah himself arrived to take a place saved for him at the head of the queue. He raced up the steps as fast as his long legs could carry him and secured the very first rows with his home rule comrades. About noon, Ruthie arrived with a tiffin basket filled with their sandwiches, for they dared not leave those choice seats, knowing Wellington supporters would start to show up in the early afternoon. The large hall was filled, in fact, hours before the robbed Sheriff of Bombay called the meeting to order. Sir Jamsetji Jiji Bhoy, one of Bombay's leading Parsis whose family fortune was made in the opium trade, presided over that meeting, but from the moment he rose to address the audience, Jinnah and his claque were on their feet shouting, "No, no." Raucous protests continued for about 20 minutes, and though no one could hear him do so, Sir Jamsetji supposedly moved the resolution of appreciation for Lord Wellington. The Commissioner of Police then ordered the hall to be cleared, and Jinnah, as well as Ruthie and their friends, were hustled forcibly outside. It was the first and only time Jinnah would be roughed up and bruised by anyone in uniform. He emerged from the town hall, however, a uniquely popular Bombay hero. "Gentlemen, you are the citizens of Bombay," Jinnah told his adoring audience that stretched across Apollo Street that evening. "Your triumph today has made it clear that even the combined forces of bureaucracy and autocracy could not overawe you. December the 11th is a red-letter day in the history of Bombay. Gentlemen, go and rejoice over the day that has secured us the triumph of democracy." That night, a huge demonstration was held in Shanturani's Chawl, and soon no fewer than 65,000 rupees were raised, much of it in 1 rupee contributions, to build People's Jinnah Memorial Hall, which still stands in the compound of Bombay's Indian National Congress building, commemorating the historic triumph of the citizens of Bombay under the brave and brilliant leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. After Jinnah left Congress, and especially after the birth of Islam, that hall appeared strangely anachronistic and is now anonymously referred to only by its initials as PJ Hall. Few Indians remembered that People's Jinnah Hall was erected to honor the fearless leadership of Bombay's most inspiring ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity.